Time for a little bit of art, I think. This is Gin Lane by William Hogarth. It's an engraving from 1751 and there's a lot going on. In the foreground we see a woman apparently drunk and suffering from syphilis dropping her baby while she takes a pinch of snuff. An emaciated man passed out or dead, people pawning their most vital possessions, derelict buildings, a man who's hanged himself, a woman dead in the street being buried. And on the right, one of the few signs of prosperity, a gin distiller. I don't know how obvious it is, but there's a message behind all this. The setting of the engraving is St. Giles. These days it lies at the heart of the West End among shops and theatres, but until the beginning of the 20th century, it was a notorious slum wherein dwelled the poorest of the poor. London had seen a drastic increase in population coming in from the countryside. Employed in the industries that used to be based in the area, families would be crammed into single rooms in insanitary and barely livable conditions. Watchmen, the closest thing to law enforcement at the time, refused to venture in. Under the circumstances, it's no wonder that they sought escape in whatever form it came. All too often it came in the form of gin. In the first half of the 18th century, Britain, particularly the urban areas, came under the spell of what is known as the gin craze. This all started with the Glorious Revolution, when William of Orange came to the throne in England in 1689. One of his first acts was to deregulate the production of gin and place heavy import duties on spirits. Why? Well, at the time, Britain had a glut of grain, far more than was usable. At least for bread. It was just fine for turning into gin. Gin was originally treated as a medicinal drink. Like William of Orange, the custom of drinking it for fun came from Holland. In fact, one theory for the origin of the phrase Dutch courage as a euphemism for drink is that British soldiers in the 80 Years' War observed Dutch troops taking a fortifying tot before going into battle. The deregulation of the gin industry, or gindustry, meant that basically anyone could produce gin very cheaply. As Hogarth observed, drunk for a penny, dead drunk for twopence, clean straw for nothing. At that price, as you might imagine, you weren't getting a quality drink. One recipe for gin at the time was spirits of wine, oil of almonds, lump sugar, lime water, rose water, salt of tartar, alum, oil of turpentine, and sulphuric acid. Rot gut in every sense. It was vile, but it was cheap, and if you wanted a few hours of oblivion, it got the job done. Unsurprisingly, gin became very popular with the poor. By 1751, there were 17,000 gin shops in London, serving a population of only 600,000. In some areas, such as Holborn, as many as 1 in 5 houses were also gin shops, not to mention other businesses that sold it on the side and street hawkers. Gin shops had little regulation, with no set opening or closing times. People would come in, drink until they passed out, wake and go right on drinking. Nor were there any rules on who you could sell to. Children as well as adults became hooked on the demon drink. Even babies fell victim, becoming drunk through breastfeeding from intoxicated mothers. The nickname Mother's Ruin for gin persists to this day. Widespread alcoholism brought with it a surge in crimes, often horrific. One Judith Dufour was hanged after strangling her 2-month-old child to sell the clothes he had been provided by the parish. Theft, vagrancy, prostitution, abuse and murder were all fueled by the need to make a few coins to feed the addiction. Violence and destruction were the inevitable result of people being drunk out of their minds. Respectable society was outraged. Some commentators blamed the intemperance of the poor. Henry Fielding, the writer and magistrate who would go on to found the Bow Street Runners, blamed the drink and its easy availability. And he was far from alone in his opinion. But the concept of doing something about it had some strong opposition, not just from distillers and gin sellers, but from the landed gentry. Remember, the start of all this was a grain surplus. King William wasn't doing a favour to the farmers, but to the aristocrats who had supported his rise to power. Nevertheless, in 1736, a Gin Act was passed that heavily taxed gin sellers and demanded that they purchase a prohibitively expensive licence. The main result of this in the long term was simply that gin went underground, and the Act was quietly dropped in 1743. Nevertheless, there were prominent and vociferous campaigners for more effective legislation, including Henry Fielding, William Hogarth, Daniel Defoe, and the Bishop of Sodor and Man. In 1751, the same year Gin Lane was drawn, they got it. The 1751 Act didn't aim to eliminate the trade as the 1736 one had, but to bring it under control. There were still fees to be paid, but lower. Furthermore, anyone selling gin had to do so from premises worth at least £10 a year. This, combined with a rise in the price of grain, helped to abate the craze. And in turn, the requirement for decent premises would give rise to the Victorian gin palaces, like the Princess Louise in Holborn here. I hope you enjoyed this stagger through an ignominious episode of London's history. If so, then please do consider hitting like and subscribing if you wish. And I'll see you again very soon. Cheerio.